evening, everybody. Hello. Hi. I'm Colleen Cosmo Murphy. Welcome to this evening, our special Classic Album Sundays session featuring singles from one of the most inspiring and legendary disco labels of them all, Salsoul. Along with West End, Prelude, TK Disco, and of course Philly International, Salsoul was one of the kingpins of disco for the record labels. Tonight we're celebrating Dimitri From Paris's new compilation called the Salsoul Master Mix, and I have Mr. Dimitri From Paris here. I think come welcome. Now, Salsoul did something very, very important that's integral to DJs and to club culture as we know it. Do you want to tell us what that is?
Are we talking about the 12-inch single?
I think we are.
Okay. Well, like most things that are really revolutionary, it was an accident. And an accident that was sort of like, it was an accident. So we have to talk about Tom Moulton. Tom Moulton, first and foremost, is someone who loves music. He's still alive. He still loves music, and he lives for music. And he was a fan of R&B at a time where white people were very far away from R&B. So he loved that music. He wanted to push it. He wanted to show the world what this music was about. And in the mid-70s, after being a male model, he was working as a PR person for Mel Sheeran. And he was always being annoyed that a lot of the records that were made in the mid-70s, a lot of the dancier records were very short. They were like 45s. The medium, the physical medium, obviously everything was physical back then, was the 7-inch 45. And he started going to clubs, talking to DJs, and the DJs were complaining, this is too short. Like, the moment the people start getting into the song, it just fades out. So he was like, why don't we ask the producers to make longer versions of the songs? And the producer was like, nah, that's how we do it. That's not what we do. So eventually, Mel Sheeran said, you keep talking about those longer songs that you want. Why don't you go into the studio, just do it yourself? So he was like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. So he went into the studio with, maybe with the original producer and the sound engineer. He was like, why don't we just extend this part? Why don't we let this run for longer? And he came up with longer versions of the song. When he had finished recording and mixing down a song, it was recorded through a piece of tape, and he would go with this reel of tape to the mastering studio, and he would want to cut what we used to call back then an acetate. So he wanted to cut this on a blank 7-inch because it was 7-inch format, and the engineer says, "Oh, I ran out of blanks 7 inches. What do we do?" So he said, maybe we can cut this into an LP blank, which it was something where you could cut 5-6 songs, like a regular LP. Tom said, why don't you just spread the groove throughout the whole side of the vinyl? And he goes like, all right. And basically it was just a slight tweaking of the machine. Say, okay, instead of being like really narrow, the groove is going to be wider. And technically, a wider groove sounds louder on a vinyl record and on an acetate. So he spread out the groove through the whole side, where you could put 20 minutes of music. He only put 5 minutes of music, and then they played it back, and he was like, "Wow, the sound is incredible," because it was louder, it had more space. It was just a technical thing, and that's how the 12-inch, the idea of putting like a shorter amount of music on a larger piece of plastic really came about. And they started to have like a few promo 12-inches for a while, and Salsoul came up with the first 12-inch. They said, this is a great medium, why don't we sell this? The DJs are raving for those things. It's promo only, people are just fighting to get it. Why don't we put that out for sale in the shops, and everyone, including the DJs who want it, can buy it? And that's how the first commercially released 12-inch came out from Salsoul, and it was
Walter Gibbons, double exposure, 10%.
Yes.
And the thing that was interesting is, instead of asking a producer to do this remix, they asked a DJ.
Yes. they started to realize that the DJ and the clubs had their own sort of like subculture, that the DJs were people that were like maybe not worshipped but followed because of their style of what they were playing. And they're like they're as Toms, you're complaining about the records being too short. The DJs are complaining about the records not being in a good format for them. Why don't we ask a DJ to come over and do what he thinks is best for his trade? So they indeed asked Walter Gibbons to be really honest. The first the version of 10% isn't a proper remix, is what we call an edit. So it's an actual cut up of the instrumental version and the vocal version. Walter didn't have access to the actual studio with a sound engineer to be able to tweak things really in depth, but it was still a DJ coming in and saying, well, this is how I see this happening in the club, and it ended up as being like a pretty long version. I think it's 9 minutes long. So that was totally groundbreaking, because for the first time the DJs, the people in the club, were giving music that was totally thought for the dancers. You know, he put in breaks, he put in like intros and stuff, and you know, obviously that was the very, very first sort of like 12-inch version that came out.
Now, Love Committee, Law and Order was also remixed by Walter Gibbons.
Incidentally,
I think we
yes.
should talk about Walter Gibbons.
Well, you probably know more about Walter than I do.
I think there might be someone else here who might know quite a bit about Walter.
Is there? You mean someone from that time?
I think there is someone from that time who maybe even played with Walter.
Should we should we action
out?
the time machine?
Should we? Is he here? Where is
There
he?
is actually someone who didn't know he was participating tonight.
I know exactly.
Who's like trying to be like, oh, they're not talking about me right now. But
I know.
can we welcome to the stage Mr. Francois K? Please welcome Francois K, good friend of ours.
Did you had played drums with Walter Gibbons?
Yes, that
didn't
was the question.
Some people say it with, other people say against. So, but yeah, I did somehow manage to.
Tell us about that. How did it come about?
The club owner just hired me to play the drums because I guess he felt that would be an added entertainment for his venue, which was called Galaxy 21. And instead of just playing records, he would have a live element to things.
And how did Walter take it?
He didn't like it at all. Mostly because when the drums, they were quite loud, obviously, and he would hear the drums. There was a time delay, and between what he heard on the record and his monitors in the booth and my drums, and it was throwing him off. So,
Did you eventually become friends?
yeah, we did. Mm-hmm. And actually, not just Walter. I'd like to also mention that probably most of you don't know this person, but the light guy. The light man was Kenny Carpenter. This now is the part of our program where we're going to go into our art curation mode. And yes, thank you. Basically, I think we need to recontextualize Mr. Gibbons' contributions to popular culture and dance music in general, and disco in particular. So the point here, let me, all joking aside, I think what we had with Walter was truly as incredible a genius and original a person as anyone that has ever managed to gain access to a recording studio and actually be asked to do remixes for people. I think that Walter was as close to a true genius as I've ever met before, because he was not bowing down to conventional wisdom. Oh, you need to have the song like this with the drums sitting nice in the mix, and you bring the bass just so, yeah, just like that, right? And then you're gonna put the horns and the vocal right here, and fuck that, let me just get the congas. You know, and the point is, he was hearing it like that. Walter, I specifically remember being there he was just playing like little bits of tracks. He had this absolutely uncanny technical skill with vinyl. He would do stuff that hip-hop DJs were doing later, where you could take a 10-second section of a song with a really difficult intro to pick out, and he would cycle the bits between the two turntables so seamlessly you couldn't even tell that it was being mixed. And he was doing that to little drum breaks, because back in those days, the records were mostly like either pop or R&B records, but that didn't really have much, as both Dimitri and Colleen were trying to explain. These records didn't really have anything more purpose-built or specifically designed for dancing. They just happened to be happy, fun records. But a lot of what the DJs were doing, which later led to what we used to call the B-boys, which was the foundation of hip-hop, was to dig out those breaks in records that were completely different, but just had one good piece. And Walter was doing that. The first time as a DJ, I got the pressing from Salsoul of this new promo of Law and Order, the remix. It was like, okay, put the record on, okay, it's an intro, it's nice, it starts, and blah, blah, blah. And then 3 minutes later, okay, where is the bass? And you still keep waiting and no bass. So, up to that point, I don't think anyone that I can remember had the courage of doing that. And it's not a matter of like trying to be daring or being bold. I think artistically, he had this vision, this feeling, and he, more than anyone else that I know, was in those early days the key person that really helped shape what everyone else kind of looked at as the outer boundaries of where you needed to reach out when you were looking at your competition.
One thing we haven't spoken about yet is how Salsoul and also disco in particular found its roots, and many times found its roots in gospel music. And there's one great example of this, an artist, one of the most famous artists signed to Salsoul, or his subsidiary Goldmine, which is Norman Harris's subsidiary of Salsoul, was Lolita Holloway. Yeah. And she had her start in the churches of Chicago until, and then Norman Harris ended up signing her to Goldmine. And Lolita, of course, is a favorite of yours, right, Dimitri?
Well, of course. No, I mean, Lolita Holloway, obviously the whole preaching part of the songs is absolutely unique, and she managed to carry that emotion like no one else. And I noticed that a lot of the songs that I started liking might not have her voice, but they were very related to gospel. The way they were playing, a lot of those musicians that were playing on Salsoul from Philadelphia just came out of the church. I mean, it's obvious that Ron Kersey was playing at a church. It's obvious that a lot of those people were playing at church, and they play in a certain way.
Now, I want to talk in particular about your compilation, the Salsoul Master Mix, and you did a bunch of re-edits, and I wanted to talk to you about re-editing and what it was like re-editing some of these songs that you grew up, you grew up with, and what kind of experience that was, and was it almost intimidating to remix some of these songs that you knew so well and you loved in the version that you knew? How did you go about doing that?
Well, I mean, first of all, this is a collection of edits that have been done like over the years, so it's not like Salsoul called me up, okay, we need 10 re-edits from you, just go to work. It was the other way around. I've got like those re-edits just that I've been playing for years, some of them for like 20 years, that people like when I play them, and it was a great opportunity to put them together and make them available to whoever was interested. But the thing with re-edits is kind of like Francois was saying earlier with Walter, just like looping a part of the song live, just repeating a part of the song off to vinyl, like beat juggling as the hip-hop DJs would do. And then Francois recreating this thing he heard, taking the same small bit but just editing one piece after the other, putting it together as it would be seamless flowing for the people to hear it. So I think as a music lover, I was buying those records, I was liking those records, and like he was saying to Prelude, oh, if this string bit was, slightly different, and if you make that longer or shorter, I just had that same idea about records that I liked. Oh, what if this break was longer? But again, a re-edit is not a remix. I'm very, very precious about that, because to do a re-edit, you only have access to what's out there. And what is out there is just the records. Maybe on the record you're lucky to have several versions of the same song that you can combine. Sometimes you only have what's there, so it's just a vocal version. And if you want to edit, you have to find the parts within the version that anyone can find that you want to use and repeat, and you want to take out the parts that you think you don't want to hear. So you don't have access to anything else than what everyone has. You can add, but you cannot subtract.
So is it really nice to see your name with Salsoul?
Yes, it is, because it's a label I always liked, and to be sort of like legitimately able to put them out, because this is no bootleg, this is obviously the official release. You get to do more things, because you get to pick up the cover, you get to put them together the way you want to put them together, you get to choose which edits you want to put out.
And how do you think Salsoul fits as a record label against Prelude and TK Disco and Casablanca and West End? What do you think its kind of defining factor is?
Well, what makes Salsoul, I guess, different than the others is the Philly sound. The beginning of Salsoul is really rooted into that Philly sound we talked about earlier, that Sigma Sound Studios, that team that was also MFSB, and there was also other names that we know mostly at the Salsoul Orchestra within the label. They had that specific sound, and where they're different from, say, like Philadelphia International Record, which was the Gamble and Off label, is that they had people like Walter Gibbons, they had people like Tom Moulton, they had people like Francois, they had actually DJs messing up with that. Whereas the rest of Philly is pretty straightforward. It's very much, verse, chorus, and not anything crazy to it. Whereas Salsoul, we're actually hiring DJs to make it for the other DJs. And as a music lover, I like the fact that it was more exciting than the other guys.
So that's Dimitri from Paris's DJ-friendly classic re-edit of Love Sensation by Lolita Holloway. And that can be found on vinyl on the re-edit Series 1, the Salsoul of the Salsoul Master Mix.